Welcome to EFT Nation, your home for all things tapping. For show notes and resources, please visit EFTtappingtraining.com. We are your tapping hosts. I'm Alina Frank.
And I'm Craig Wiener. The information provided in this podcast is not a substitute for counseling or medical advice. The information presented here is meant to inspire and educate listeners, but are not guarantees of any kind.
Alrighty, we are working on or discussing trauma pull and trauma dumping.
And what do they have in common?
Well, other than
trauma,
the word
obviously.
trauma, I think you'll realize that they're more closely related than you think. But first, we have to define what these things are. I thought it was important to cover this because one was really a hot topic, went viral, trauma dumping. And then the other one is a mystery to so many, even EFT practitioners and even people that work with trauma, even therapists. I think that if it hadn't been for Suzanne Fagel teaching me about this concept years ago, I would not have understood how critically important it is to understand
and how
when
common.
doing trauma. Yeah, you see it all the time. All right, so I will start off with talking about trauma dumping, and then I'd like for you to explain trauma pull. All right. So trauma dumping refers to offloading of sadness and fear and anger and emotional venting when it is done without asking permission of the listener. Like, let's say you're at a party or a social event, and you have a stranger come up to you and start telling you about like their childhood traumas. So trauma dumping, you have to think about it like, first of all, boundaries and when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate, and how there is a line between your friend telling you like, oh my gosh, this horrible thing happened to me, versus your friend, completely just like washing over all, just like, I almost feel like it's energetically like regurgitating all of this horrific trauma with details that you aren't, as a listener, aren't ready to handle, or it might not be in the right appropriate place. So this is the kind of thing where like you think about boundaries and what's appropriate and what's not, and there are often some gray areas. So let's say that you are a therapist or an EFT practitioner, and you're in a party and someone comes up to you and starts doing that because they hear of your profession. You need to stop that. You need to shut it down. You need to say, hey, let's gently say it's not appropriate. This isn't the time. I really understand that you're going through a difficult challenge with this. Let's set something up, more like when it's appropriate, at the appropriate time, appropriate place.
Yeah, my concern is, obviously, the term is being used, so we're addressing it. I don't like the term at all because it has kind of a negative, judgmental connotation to what they're doing is wrong.
Right.
And it's going to definitely tie into when we're talking about the trauma pull. But, somebody that is actively dealing with the after effects of trauma that's maybe being triggered or happening in their life doesn't have the same capacity to be reasonable and self-aware enough to realize that this moment might not be the place for a boundary. Exactly. It may not be not okay to share that in this circumstance because their facility and clarity of appropriateness is being
So trauma dumping really doesn't include or respect the consent of the listener, and often seems one-sided. And okay, so here's the interesting the story that went viral, because I think that this is really fascinating. So there was a well-known TikTok therapist who went on and started saying that she couldn't stand when her clients were were trauma dumping on her.
Now, wait a minute. That's a totally different situation than you meeting somebody and your practitioner, whatever, at a party, and they start all of a sudden without even you inquiring, and they start going from my day to my childhood to what happened with my dad, all of that.
Yeah.
That's outside the context for that therapeutic context.
So of course, consequences of doing these things online, she got raked through the coals. And other therapists came on and said, wait a minute, like, that's what you get paid for. And now this is where it ties into trauma pull.
Well, so I mean, definitely there's overlap here. So the trauma pull, said simply, is a phenomenon that describes when somebody has unresolved trauma, unresolved traumatic incidents and experiences in their life that are still affecting them. And when they begin to tap into, talk about this experience from their past, what starts to happen is almost like, I think of it almost like I'm holding a fishing pole and I'm reeling something in and it's getting pulled faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. What starts to happen is the person starts to begin to re-experience, or they start to feel a pull to share more and more and deeper and faster. And what starts to happen is often there's this disconnection from their feelings and from their sensations and being present, because they start to get lost in like the snowball effect of the story.
Well, it's almost like that's the way they get through it.
Right. So the way that I think about it, another analogy is like, okay, somebody's on one side of a river and like there's this piranha-infested river, alligator-infested river, whatever, and somebody decides they're going to get to the other side, or they need to get to the other side of the river, and what starts to happen is they start walking across, and the circumstances make them feel like, I got to go faster and faster, and they start running across to get to the other side. And there's like this subconscious pull to get from the beginning to the end of the story or experience that they're sharing about as fast as possible, kind of disconnecting, dissociated, feeling separate from, not pausing to experience it, not pausing to process it, because in their experience, it's not safe going across that river. It's not safe sharing that story. Mm-hmm. And so they dive in and they fast and they run across. So, what this experience can sound something like too is, in therapy circles, in groups, when people start to revisit their stories, they kind of disconnect from it. They tell it really fast, even with vivid, gory details,
right,
moving to the other side. And so
it doesn't heal.
No, it doesn't heal, because there's no ability to ground during the story. There's no ability to process. It's just retelling. It's kind of like, I think about is kind of hitting the play button on the old cassette record.
Right.
And then hitting fast forward. So, and then it gets to stop, right? So It didn't change the recording. It didn't alter the way that those tracks were laid down. Mm-hmm. Which is what we are doing, for example, in EFT, when we're doing like the tell the story technique or other processes to work slowly and gently with the trauma.
Yeah.
So what is that? How is that applicable in EFT? What's really important is, number one, to recognize it.
Absolutely.
Right? As the practitioner, that's what's happening here.
Yeah.
And then two, to develop the inner muscle, so to speak, to be able to know that in their highest and greatest good is to slow them down, or to pause them, or even to stop them, but while still staying in rapport and connect. So hold on. So we don't want to rewire this just one more time and lay down yet another layer and another track of this. We're going to go through this slowly, or it's not appropriate to go through this today. We're going to go ahead and hold it. We're going to come back. Thank you for sharing that, but we're going to come back maybe in the next session when we have more time.
And my priority as your practitioner is to keep you safe above all else. So that if you explain it, if you pre-frame it, mm-hmm, and tell them that when you're doing tell the story, you pre-frame and tell your clients that yes, you will likely be interrupting them, but it's not because you don't want to hear what they have to say. It is really because you're keeping them safe. No one's going to argue with that.
Right. So if a client starts to experience that trauma pull, and all of a sudden they're almost starting to revisit that event and re-experience it, and it's starting to go faster and faster, and they're even speeding up their tone, is that trauma dumping?
Well, yeah, maybe. It could be.
Well, then it goes back to your definition, because...
It could be.
Well, I would disagree, because for me, trauma dumping is context.
Right.
And in that situation in which they're feeling safe enough to express that,
right.
and you've either asked about that or led to that in a therapeutic context of relationship,
right.
to me, there's no such thing as trauma dumping. The ability to have a client be able to self-regulate, to self-witness, to self-observe, there's no way, especially if they're getting pulled into that current. So for me, there is no such thing in a therapeutic context.
Oh, in a therapeutic context, but in a social one.
Well, that's different.
Yeah.
So it really is about context,
right.
That we're discussing. But I think that trauma pull and that need to revisit that and share that and go into the detail can happen in a therapeutic context, as well as in other contexts that are not appropriate to share it, but the person might not have that self-awareness.
Yes.
And in the attempt that a part of them is desiring to heal from it as well.
Yeah. We have some pretty good examples of the trauma pull happening. Whenever I've worked with a big T trauma in one of my A to Z's or any of the teaching videos that I have out there, you'll see it very clearly. And the one that comes to mind, which you can find very easily, we could put it in the show notes, Craig, the link to, if you search Alina Frank, Korean war vet, I'm doing a training for therapists that work inside the VA. And this veteran had gone decades of telling his worst story from Korea in his PTSD support group. And that's the way he was going to share it with me when we were doing Tell the Story on it. And I stopped him many times and prevented him from being sucked into that trauma pull over and over and over again.
And isn't that part of, I recently did another show that was on trauma-informed tapping, right? Trauma-informed EFT. And the idea of this trauma awareness of tendencies and patterns and behaviors of somebody that's lived through trauma. I mean, it's what we talk a lot about in Tapping Out of Trauma, the course. That the more that I'm aware of that as a practitioner for my clients and self-aware for myself, the more able and skilled I am in creating a safe context in which a client is regulated, because again, when working with trauma, you only want to go as fast as the slowest part of you feels safe going. And so these are really important concepts to understand to be able to find some resolution and healing from traumatic past episodes. Yeah.
So I think it is the therapist that got called out for saying that she was getting trauma dumped by her clients. I think she just wasn't well educated enough to understand that there are clients that are going to want to share the worst of the worst with you, and you have to understand that that is a trauma pull that's happening, and working safely with it means slowing it down, understanding how to stop it, how to process it thoroughly without re-traumatizing the client, and that's just really. I think EFT does a great job of that.
And I have a hypothesis.
Okay.
That if, I don't want to say this, it's been my experience that many people that enter the mental health world and the therapy world.
Oh, and EFT practitioners
and
too.
And EFT practitioner,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
That a big part of that is in the attempt to heal their own past.
Sure.
Right? I mean, I think many, if not most, would probably admit that. So if that particular therapist, who I have no idea about, really got so triggered by a client, by clients trauma dumping, what is being activated within that practitioner that felt the need to literally stand out, call that out, etc., as a possible trigger for her own past experience that may not have been resolved. Maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this isn't to say that you shouldn't be a compassionate friend and listen when someone is really hurting.
Right.
But you have to also take care of yourself, and as someone that's a highly sensitive person or an empath, you need to know that there are some times where you're going to really need for self-care, that it might not be the right time or place, or that you might not be the right person to share all of that with, or invite them to share those real details of the traumatic event with a professional. Yeah. All right. Excellent topic.
Okay. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us today at EFT Nation. And remember that you can find show notes and previous episodes at EFTtappingtraining.com.